Organizational structure is all about how do you come up with an appropriate way of divvying up the responsibilities of core asset development and product development. There are also some other organizational aspects like this list shown here, but primarily the division of roles and responsibilities really comes down to, should we have a separate part of the organization developing the core assets and feeding them to the product development groups, or should the entire product line effort be done as an integrated team in which the roles and responsibilities shown here are shared across a set of people reporting to the same manager, for example. We conducted a product line workshop several years ago that looked at this issue of organizational structure. And there were some people at that workshop who said that absolutely you want to have a separate core asset development team because they are people who are focused on the long-term vision for the product line. They're creating a set of assets for an entire set of products. They're not wedded to a particular product. They can truly take the long view for the product line. There was another group in the workshop that said, no way do you want to have a separate organization because product development is where the action is. Ultimately, that's how we get paid. If you factor off people into this separate organization that's doing the domain modeling and the analysis and coming up with the architecture, they will spend all their lives coming up with the world's best architecture and the world's best domain model. All you'll get out of them is beauty but not profit. So how do you make that structuring decision? Well, some criteria you can use are things like, what's the size of the overall effort in terms of how many products are you planning to build? And whether or not you can get money associated with something that would allow you to create core assets, or the money is tied solely to product development. So in those cases, it's probably more effective to have an integrated team doing core asset development and product development. In the one case, because that's where the expertise. In another case, because most of the money is going to product development, and you'll have to figure out how to do some of the creation of reusable assets within that context using that funding line. Is it new development or is it mostly legacy-based systems? If it's mostly legacy-based systems that are being used as the basis for your product line effort, then chances are the expertise resides within those product developers, and that's, again, a case for having an integrated development team. If it's a totally new development effort, then you might want to consider factoring out the core asset work from the product development work.
It would almost be worth your while. I can see both arguments. I would personally lean towards a separate group, not necessarily a business division, but a team within the division, and then rotate the developers in and out.
Well, funny you should say, because that's one of the things coming up, yes. What a segue. This is my straight man here. There are other things then like parallel or sequential development. If you are only turning out products one at a time, or you're not trying to manage multiple efforts in parallel, the way Celsius Tech was, then for the sequential development, it's probably okay to have an integrated team. But for multiple products in parallel, you should probably factor out the core asset work to support those multiple teams. I should say in the group that's doing the product development, they have to, if you're factored out into these two groups, the product development group has to create products from the core assets using the guidance that was created for them by the core asset development group. So you can't have core asset people just throwing code over the fence to product development and expecting them to do the right thing with it. So they do need to provide the necessary guidance, and there needs to be some checks and balances to make sure that product development is actually following through on that guidance. Jan Bosch, who was a university researcher at the time, who has since, he became vice president of research at Nokia, is now working for Intuit. he looked at a number of Scandinavian organizations and how they were structured for product line efforts. And he came up with some models for how these organizations are structured based on the size of the organization. So the first one here that he called the development department model. In this model here, everybody in this large organization here, in this large rectangle, reports to the same manager. But there are some people devoted to creating an architecture and a set of reusable components that will be reused in product development. The shaded squares in the product development efforts down here are representative of things that are not covered in the core asset base. This is components for product-specific development. But this is a single integrated organization, and they all report to the overall product line manager. This organizational structure in Bosch's findings works for organizations of up to about 30 people. When you get beyond that, give or take, but when you get beyond that size in his findings, you need to start thinking about streamlining the reporting channels. So this is one that he calls the business unit model. This is where an organization is structured into multiple different business units, but there's an agreement among those business units to provide people to populate this virtual organization that's going to create an architecture and a set of components for the benefit of all of the business units. And this is an organizational structure that does actually work in practice, and we've seen this in some of our customers. The risk with this kind of organization is that if everybody doesn't play fair in this virtual organization, there's a potential for biasing the core assets created in here in favor of the needs of a particular business unit. So you need to make sure that people are altruistic enough and cooperative enough not to bias a core asset base in favor of the needs of particular product development efforts within a business unit. Yes, Don.
And of course the other side is that the various business units seek to staff that organisation with people that they don't necessarily want.
That's another risk, yes. And so again, where's your product line champion in all of this? Yes. So this organizational structure in Bosch's findings works for organizations of around 100 people. Once you get beyond that, then you really do need to separate out into organizations devoted to creating core assets and creating products, or using the older terminology of Bosch's paper, a domain engineering unit and a product engineering unit. So the people in the domain engineering unit report to the manager of that unit, and the people in the product engineering unit report to the manager of that product development effort. So you really do have a two-tiered organization here. When you get beyond that then into organizations with hundreds or thousands of people, there is the hierarchical approach to product lines, where you have a group creating a set of core assets, and down here you have groups creating products, but there's a subset of the products in the product line for which it makes sense to treat as a sub-product line within the overall product line, because there's a set of assets in common across this subset of products that doesn't extend to the entire product line. But the organization is large enough that it's worthwhile structuring these as a sub-product line within the overall product line. The risk with this kind of approach is that, well, if one sub-product line is good, then many sub-product lines are even better. And in fact, when we look at the level of commonality down here, maybe we ought to have sub-product lines. So Bosch's recommendation is that you don't get carried away with this one, because it can lead to organizational bloat. But this is a structure that he actually observed in Nokia at the time he did his case study. Nokia was one of the organizations that he looked at and subsequently ended up working for. Ivar Jakobsen, in his book on software reuse, has an alternative approach that he calls competence units, where you have people with expertise in various competences that can be farmed out to core asset development or product development. And the last one here is basically what Mike was talking about, where you have a core asset group, but they are distributed among the product development group. So they get to do a tour of duty in product development. They know what it's like to be dependent on people who are in your critical path to get products out the door. Don?
Which addresses the purity versus practicality.
Yes, exactly. This is a way of mitigating the risk of beauty but not profit. They get a dose of the day-to-day reality of product building.